Well, so many of us over the weekend enjoyed everything that the NCAA basketball tournament has to offer. We look to sports for an escape, and all too often we can't escape some of the behavior of high-profile athletes. And we're joined today by a woman who's trying to do something about that. And I've listened to her several times on her show on SiriusXM covering college sports. Her name is Rachel Barbeau. She's our guest here on CRTV. And Rachel, it's good to finally connect with you. How are you?
Thanks so much for having me on.
You've got a presentation called Changing the Narrative. Tell us about it.
Woo! I go to college campuses across the country. I've been to 22 and counting, and have 6 more in the next 30 days. And I talk to young men about purpose, passion, platform, how do we view women, and how do we treat women. Steve, I think that if we're leaving the raising of our young men to popular culture, to music, to magazines, to movies, we are, excuse my French, screwed. I really believe that we can go on these campuses like I am doing and raise up kings and encourage them to be the kind of man that they're proud of in every facet of their life. For so many of these athletes, they've been told to be a king on the football field, but I'm asking them to be a king in every area of their life.
What I find fascinating about this is your presentation, Rachel, in and of itself, is defying stereotypes, because here you are as a woman, and I listen to the terms that you're using, and I'm a dad who has daughters and a son, so I see both sides of this transaction that you're describing. And what I hear you doing actually is calling men to actual masculinity, to actual manhood, as opposed to urging them to put their masculinity aside. It seems to me the assumption of your presentation is too many of these young men have not been taught what masculinity actually is.
You hit the nail on the head, my friend. I had one coach tell me, I was going to a school, and you know, we talked about what does it mean to be a good man. And so I asked this coach, I said, talk to me about what do your players need? I said, you know, I talk about chivalry, we talk about dating, we talk about purpose and passion and platform. And he said, Rachel, a lot of these players don't even understand the word chivalry. You're going to have to explain that. And when he said that, it occurred to me that it's not enough to say to these young men, be a good man, because so many of them have not seen good father figures in their homes, have had dysfunctional backgrounds. And so I think that God put me in this role, and having this career and having this platform, which is what I teach them, is to be a different vessel, a female sportscaster who's been at the top of her game, to be able to call them to be the man that they were created to be. It, like you said, I'm not just another man asking them to be a good man. I'm a female asking them to be a good man, to open doors, to get involved when it's messy, to get involved especially when it's messy, to respect females. I tell them, listen, it's not enough to be nice to her on the date. I'm talking about how do you look at women, and how do you think about women, and how do you feel about women when they're not around?
When we look at some of the stories that have come out in recent months, ever since really the Harvey Weinstein saga and scandal broke, the whole hashtag Me Too movement, broke it wide open, and it's now encompassed several different industries. One of the stories, when we got to what happened allegedly with Matt Lauer, that he essentially had some kind of dungeon office that was automated, where he could essentially trap women if he wanted to. One of the things that disturbed me about that story the most, that is going to go unreported in our politically correct media, but all those years he was there, and I said this here on CRTV, there was never a manager, a janitor. No one ever saw a woman, running out of his office crying or disturbed. I mean, I'm not necessarily advocating the law of the jungle here, but, in other generations, we had to urge men not to do really bad things outside the law to men who behaved the way Matt Lauer is alleged to have behaved. And now it just seems as if we have to actually encourage men to act at all, when in past generations we had to maybe get them to tone it down, the kind of retribution they would seek instead. Have you noticed this exact trend, Rachel?
Yeah, I noticed this exact trend. Again, it's what I talked about at the beginning of the interview, and that is if we're leaving the raising of these young men and men in general to what we're seeing in this country right now, what we're teaching them and fostering is a lack of accountability. You can be a coward. You don't have to call her back. You don't have to respect her. You can look at her like a piece of you know what. And absolutely. And that is being pushed forward by every not every, but a lot of magazines, a lot of movies, a lot of music. The hypersexualization of our country right now, of our society right now. And I am asking them to be, as you mentioned, a throwback. I am asking them to get involved, especially when it's messy. I am asking them to hold the other players, their community, and the people around them accountable for their actions. And that's where I have a shirt that says K plus Q. And one of the things that we talk about to these young men, and you as a father of daughters will really appreciate this, is I say, you can may attract a queen, but you'll never keep a queen if you're not a king, right? In every facet of your life. So I'm calling on them to be kings so that they can have a queen, the kind of woman that will change their life and really wreck it in the best possible way. But these young men, Steve, will go on to raise daughters, and a lot of them have daughters. And so it really is that trickle-down effect, and the stories have just been remarkable.
When you talk about the lost art of masculinity and not having the male role model in the home, I mean, and you're primarily, of course, dealing with millennials. You and I are Generation X. And really, we were really the first generation coming out of the sexual revolution, with our parents being baby boomers, where this became rampant. Societal-wide, I think it's about 40% of children now are born out of wedlock. I was born to a 15-year-old mom. I think in the Hispanic community, I think it's about 2/3 of kids are born out of wedlock. I think in the black community, it's about 75% of kids are born out of wedlock. I'm reminded of something the late Chuck Colson told me before he died, after doing decades of prison ministry. He said, I could ask every man on death row, and it wouldn't matter what demographic they were, what race they were, what age they were. If I simply asked him, who's your dad? Where was your dad? Either he was never in the home or he's in prison too. It was almost universal. And so we are on our second generation now of a lack of these role models. Beyond, rejection, we're dealing with ignorance. These guys just simply don't know what the role model is. And I go back, our oldest daughter turned 17 last month, and when she was really little, she asked me one of those questions kids will ask you that stop you dead in your tracks. And she asked me, Daddy, what's a real man? And I did what every parent does in that moment when they don't know how to answer, and they said, pretended not to hear. Honey, what'd you say, to stall for time? And because she's my kid, she wasn't going to be put off, but was going to demand an answer. And she said, what is a real man? And I stopped and I thought about it, and I said, honey, I think a real man is somebody that does what he thinks is right, even when he doesn't want to, because he loves the people he's doing it for more than he loves himself.
Yes.
And then I thought, I don't know where that came from. I guarantee it's the smartest thing I'll ever say in my life. That was 15 years ago, and I can attest, looking at everything I've said the last 15 years, Rachel, absolutely, I've not said anything smarter than that in the last 15 years.
Listen, that was genius. That was absolutely genius, Steve. And that's right on. That's what we are teaching these men. And one of the other things that these coaches tell me is the correlation of forgiveness. One of the coaches said to me, Rachel, I'd like you to come in and talk about love and forgiveness, because so many of these young men, their fathers now are coming in saying, I want to be in your life now that you have a motive of success. And so, that's a big deal. That's a big narrative that we talk about. I have to share this one story with you, Steve. I think this will rock your world like it rocked mine. At one school I visited last year, afterwards, I give these bracelets to them, and they say, changing the narrative. And I say, don't take this bracelet if you're going to walk out of here and be the same man that you were when you walked in. If you're going to cheat on the test, loaf in practice, not keep your word, talk ugly about women when they're not around, don't take this bracelet. But if you're a changed man, then take it. And so this young man, his name's Trey, comes up and hugs me. And later on, they follow me on Twitter, and I follow them back so they can have a safe place to DM me and share their stories and their hearts. And he said, Rachel, I have to tell you, he said, I was so inspired after your talk. He said, I picked up to the phone to call my father. But let me tell you something about my father. I said, okay. And he said, my dad's a deadbeat dad. He said, and I didn't want to be anything like him. And I realized in a lot of ways that I was turning out just like him. He said, so after your talk, I was so inspired that I picked up the phone and said, I forgive you for being a deadbeat dad. Now, Steve, if you can just imagine what it was like to be that father on the other end of the line that did nothing right, in terms of being a sperm donor, because that's what he was, and he got that grace and forgiveness. So if that weren't enough, I go on and I tell this young man stories at other schools, and a school this past December, I tell a story, and two young men, different color skin, different socioeconomic backgrounds. One says, "Miss Rachel, I haven't talked to my mama in 3 years." And I said, "Oh, baby," I said, "there's no reason why you shouldn't talk to your mom. Please promise me that you're going to call her." And a few players later, another young man, "My mom left when I was in 3rd grade. She was a drug addict." And I said, "Is she alive?" And he said, "She is." And I said, "Can you find her?" And he said, "I can." And so I circled back around with those players just before Christmas, Steve, and they both had called their moms that night and were reunified before Christmas. And I called that original player and I said, "You have no idea what you did. You'll never meet these players, but you set off a chain reaction of grace and forgiveness, and you've affected two people's lives and many more that you'll never know." So to your point, at all of these stops, I get, "My dad wanted me aborted. He went on and had a new family, but you've inspired me to forgive him. My dad had an affair on my mom, and I've not been able to forgive him, but after your talk, I'm inspired to forgive him." So what we're doing with this talk, Steve, is setting off a chain reaction of grace and forgiveness.
And everything you talked about, I've experienced that in my own life. I can attest. You talk about the young man who grew up with an abusive father and didn't want to become like him and found himself becoming exactly like him. That was my story too, until I had that grace and forgiveness and redemption in my own life. So, Rachel, how can our audience, who's maybe hearing about you and this work for the first time, how can they follow what you're doing here to impact these young men?
Absolutely. They can go to bekings.org. That's bekings.org, or follow me on Twitter at Rachel Barbeau. The coolest part of this is, Steve, I never wanted to go in and be a talk for 55 minutes. So I have been working with the NCAA and now have it cleared. When I go and visit these schools for a second time, and the players get together and they vote on the young man that most exemplifies the changing the narrative man. So he's kind, he's thoughtful, he serves, he leads, he cares about other people, he sticks his neck out, he gives max effort. And they will vote on him, Steve, and he will get the Changing the Narrative Man Award. And that will be, again, voted on by his peers, not just me. And when he exhausts his eligibility or leaves school, as long as he's still the same man, he will be eligible for a $2,500 endowment to start his own foundation. Not a business, but his own foundation. And that's been cleared. I'm just thrilled by the NCAA. And so we are really just trying to teach them to fish instead of just feeding them, and teaching what it feels like to serve and to change the world and have their own changing the narrative. So if somebody would like to have me into their workplace, because I speak to corporations, or to their school, they can go to bekings.org. Or they can find me on Twitter at Rachel Barbeau.
Well, from listening to you talk about this on SiriusXM the last couple of years, I had a feeling if we got you on, you were going to inspire our audience, and you did. I mean, you absolutely crushed it, Rachel. Thank you for joining us and for all the work you're doing. I'm a living testimony to what other lives can be changed when you change the life of a young man. So please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for getting it. Not everybody does. Thank you for having a heart that sees and a mind that sees. I'm super appreciative for people like you. You're the reason why we've had 2 million hits on social media in the past year and a half, almost 2 years in August, and 22 schools and counting. I'm so grateful for you.
God bless you. Take care.
Thank you.